meet her at night, in a dark place. She's beautiful, and she's waiting for you, waiting to love you to death. Who was this strange and beautiful creature who called herself Diane, who lived among the dead and the forgotten?
Diane, there's one thing I don't get. The headstone said your husband died in 1875.
And what were her sinister plans for the attractive young couple she enticed into her evil world? What was the source of the malignant power by which she drew them into an endless night of unearthly horror? Velvet Vampire, starring Michael Blodgett, Sherry Miles, and Celeste Yarnall, in a strange triangle of love and death and terror. The Velvet Vampire.
Hello and welcome to another drive-in double feature. I'm Ryan.
I'm Nathan.
And this is the podcast where we review two movies every week, every Tuesday and Thursday. But today we are reviewing 1971's The Velvet Vampire, directed by our first female director, Stephanie Rothman. And if you didn't know just by the title, this is a vampire movie.
Yeah, you know, it's a weirdo vampire movie too, so.
Oh, is it? Mm-hmm. And continuing the theme, because our last episode was Roger Corman. I mean, why not do another Roger Corman? Totally didn't realize it until after I picked it. I was like, so we did another Roger Corman movie.
Roger Corman always pops up. I tell you what, you'll start up a movie and you'll see New World Pictures, and it's like, oh, all right, Corman again.
I mean, it's just kind of one of those things where if you're watching a movie between 60s and the 80s, it could undoubtedly be a Roger Corman movie.
Yeah, little do you know, listener, you probably have a Roger Corman favorite sitting in your favorites list and you don't even know it. So
absolutely. You've definitely have seen his fingerprints somewhere.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's the power of Corman. And you know what? I'm learning stories about this guy, and you know he's won Oscar and an Oscar. Sorry,
an Oscar. Yes.
Yeah. And everyone praises him, but he's not sounding like the best guy. We'll break down into Corman what he did with this movie, and some of the things he did with this movie a little bit after.
We'll break that down. But as I said, this is a vampire movie. Nathan, what's some of your favorite vampire movies?
Ooh, okay. So, I mean, this is cliche, but I really like The Lost Boys. The Lost Boys is a fun movie. It's got a cool soundtrack. It's got a great cast. That's just an all-around enjoyable movie. It's really popular. Otherwise, I'd say, like, let's cover it on the show, but that one is, like, surpassed its cult status at this point.
I mean, you get two Corys for the price of one with this movie. So.
Right. There's a lot of good vampire movies. It's hard to even think of one. There's a really good one called Shadow of the Vampire. which is about them making a Nosferatu, which is about the guy who, starred as Nosferatu and how he thinks he is a vampire in real life. Cool movie. Willem Dafoe really knocking it out of the park in that one.
Absolutely. I was going to name that one if you didn't.
Nice.
Mine, which this is going to come across even more cliche, is Dracula.
Oh, wow. Yeah, the Hammer film? Right?
No, well, actually, to be serious, I actually prefer the Hammer version more than I do the Bela Lugosi one.
I do too, and I don't have any hate towards the Bela Lugosi one, but if there was one I was going to rewatch, it would be the Christopher Lee one.
Absolutely, and that's no slight against Bela Lugosi. Pretty much he invented how vampires act. If you've seen any vampire in any popular genre, or like what it's modeled after, it's Bela Lugosi.
Oh, for sure. Because out of all the things that movie I may not like about it, Bela Lugosi is definitely not one of the bad things in that movie. He is perfect in that role.
And side note, which we may have to do this at some point too, which I've always wanted to see, is the Spanish version of Dracula, which is supposedly better than the original Dracula because they've filmed on the exact same sets and they're able to see the dailies and they're able to improve those shots.
Yeah, exactly. I've heard that the only thing that's lesser is that it doesn't have Bela Lugosi. Otherwise, it's really good. It's longer than the American version, so there's even more to it. So I need to watch it myself. I've seen so many of those Universal classic horror movies, but not that version.
And who could forget Leslie Nielsen and Dracula Dead and loving it? But there's that one.
That's like the only Mel Brooks movies I've never seen because I've heard it's so bad.
It's a guilty pleasure, one I watched as a kid. But
Gotcha.
But getting back on track, let's get back to talking about the Velvet Vampire. And this is not your run-of-the-mill vampire movie, would you say, Nathan?
No, God, no. It's I didn't know what to expect going in, but it's definitely somewhere between artsy and horror, right? It definitely wears it's an art film on its sleeve.
It definitely is. There's a lot of these really super dramatic shots or just these really out there scenes where it'll just be like a naked couple in a bed, like at a beach or in a desert. And then another woman just shows up, the vampire, and trying to seduce the male character. But the main plot of it is that there's a young married couple and they go and spend time with another younger woman who happens to be a vampire, and she tries to kind of seduce them and kind of break up their dynamic.
Yeah, it's a vampire movie that's more about the sexual aspect of a vampire, drawing them in for sexual whatever desire rather than sucking blood. Sucking blood and stuff like that is in it, but it's definitely playing on that trope a little bit more.
Yeah, and it's definitely, I will say, at least it being directed by a woman, there's not a lot of those super gratuitous nudity scenes. The scenes where there are nude actors, it's just kind of it's not it's just kind of they're in the middle of the scene together. They're not really let's just show boobs to show boobs. Well, I guess I can't say that for sure.
Yeah, okay, so it's not gratuitous in the fact that we've watched a lot of movies recently where it's really bad.
I will say the bar's been set super low now compared to the movies we watched.
It's somewhat tasteful. I will say that. There are times where maybe there's a little too much boobs, but otherwise it's kind of tasteful and makes sense in the sense of the movie.
Well, yeah, because as I was talking, I'm like, no, it's not true, because there's a scene where the couple is just sitting there in bed and she's just sitting there topless for no reason other than just to show her boobs.
Yeah, and I would blame it on Corman being put more boobs in the movie, but I guess he was hands off for most of this movie, which is good.
Yeah, and that's a good point to bring up, because Stephanie Rothman, this is not her first Corman movie, because she directed a movie called The Student Nurses, which you did a review on.
Yeah, over on the Media Boys YouTube channel. did like a 2-minute review of it. Student Nurses is a great movie. It's like a hidden feminist movie. From the outside looking in, you'd think it's like a sexploitation movie, but it really deals with a lot of issues, women's issues at the time with feminism and abortion. It's a solid movie, and I guess it did so well that Corman was like, "Hey, Rothman, get over here. You need to make us another movie." So.
Yeah, and that did lend her the creative license to make the movie that she wanted to, and she got to make it with her husband, who was also the producer. So it kind of lends itself to where she was able to make the movie she wants, and Roger Corman didn't get his grimy fingers all of it and say, add more boobs, add more rape scenes, or whatever.
Yeah, right. So good job getting him out of the picture. And I guess ultimately he would be disappointed in the film himself. But I could see Corman not being an art fan, because I mean, I keep saying it, but this movie has like a feeling to it that's just a little off. It's just a little weird. And that's one of the things I really like about this movie, honestly.
Yeah. And I'm going to be honest, it didn't hold my attention at first, because just a lot of the shots where it just feels like it's like these real static shots of talking, and the acting is not very good.
No.
And it really took a lot for me to hold my interest. And we talked about this off air, but you mentioned that it's like, I don't know if I sunk in the full message of this movie, and I felt the exact same way before you texted me that. And I was like,
really?
I don't really feel like I gave this movie a fair shot. And I didn't rewatch the whole thing, but I rewatched about a good half of the movie just to kind of like, all right, let me re-ingest this. Maybe there's something in here I'm missing. And
yeah, wow. I'm glad that we felt the same way on that. That's all. I'm glad I wasn't alone in that thought.
And ultimately, I liked it more after my second viewing.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't love it still, but it's definitely, I definitely have a stronger opinion of it after that second viewing.
Yeah, I think it's a movie that warrants a second viewing. Yeah, because the first time I was like, okay, this is a little slow. I was just getting out of it, and I like the same deal. I watched maybe half of it, like skipping around, kind of like re-ingest some of the movie before this podcast. And I think this movie, I appreciate what it does more than my full enjoyment of it. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. The ideas are solid. It's just the execution is not quite up to par where the ideas are.
Exactly. The worst part is, for me, is the acting from everybody else except for the main vampire. It's just bad, man. Like, it's just, they're not good. And I mean, in these exploitation movies, sure, that's just the way it is, but they're like not good.
Right. Well, I mean, when you watch like a horror movie and you're watching something that has lots of blood and violence and gore, you're kind of expecting, okay, this is not going to be Oscar caliber acting here. This is going to be something not great, but if I see something cool in there, then it kind of makes up for it. This one, the acting is certainly not there, but the ideas, like I said, they're really interesting. And I think if the cast was a lot more solid and maybe there was a little bit more dynamic shots in there, I think this would be like a really good movie.
Same here. I would have loved a little bit more like weird imagery, like the dream sequences, because what I think is so cool is there's a mirror in this couple's room, and the vampire, what she does is watches them sleep, and it kind of like seeps into their dreams, and they have like romantic dreams in the desert of them having sex on a bed in the middle of the desert. Really cool imagery of like her walking through the mirror. It needed more of that. It needed a little bit more of that, I think.
Right. And I'm not, and I don't normally say this, but I think this would be a perfect movie to remake.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. No, totally agree. I wonder, I haven't seen it, but that movie, The Love Witch, I wonder if it was inspired by this, because I saw it come up in conversations a few times, and in the poster and some imagery reminds me of it. But I think a full-blown remake would be nice. I mean, I think remakes are a good idea if the source material wasn't executed perfectly. If you think you could do a better job, then go for it. And I think this could be done better.
Right, and it's very clear the director had some ideas that maybe technology just wasn't there at the time, because when they did do the scene of her walking out of the mirror, that was actually like a super complicated shot back then. And now, I mean, they have a computer and you can just walk out of any old thing. But
yeah, well, that's what makes these movies so cool.
Right. So, I mean, it's just, there is style to this movie, and that's the kind of stuff in there that you're like, okay, this is working, but it's just the things in there, like just all the other materials just aren't adding up to it. And there's some really dumb stuff in here too. At the very end of the movie, I want to talk about this, is when her husband dies, and the vampire is chasing the female, the bride, the wife, and chasing her through this bus station, which apparently they were not allowed to shoot in there, so they just shot inside of a real bus station, and those are like real passengers in the movie. Mm-hmm. But they get outside, and there just happens to be a merchandise stand with all these different crucifixes on there. So she takes the crucifix, and then she immediately convinces this mob of people to swarm the vampire and shove a cross in her face, and then she just dies.
Yeah. I actually really like this final sequence because it's one of the more exciting parts of the movie.
It's exciting, but I just think the idea of them doing that is really stupid.
Yeah, I totally agree. No, I mean, with the mob, and she does die. So, in the end, it's almost like this mob of people, just kill this person in public. It's,
right.
It's interesting.
And so this movie does not operate by the classic vampire rules where vampires hate sunlight, because this woman just hangs out in the sun.
She lives in the desert. She just wears a hat to cover her face and drives a damn dune buggy. It's so silly.
And she drives the shit out of that dune buggy, because there's one that she hits a hill and she goes in midair.
Yeah, that's the first time you see her. They're like, oh, there's somebody, because the main couple, their car breaks down, and they're like, oh, somebody to save us. And she just drives her dune buggy, and it's like a stunt jump in the air. It's something. And this dune buggy comes up again. One of the funniest scenes is the couple eating dinner with the vampire, and she's like, oh, would you like to drive my dune buggy? And then the man's like, oh, I would drive it hard. And as his is it just his girlfriend or his wife?
They're married,
yeah. His wife is just sitting there just taking it. I feel like that was a lot of this movie, though.
That's what the thing was. That was the other thing that was like, what the hell? This guy was openly flirting with this vampire woman, and just right in front of his wife, and every time his wife points out why are you flirting with this woman, and he gets annoyed at her, he's like, what do you expect, I mean, we're out here in the desert.
Yeah, he fools around with the vampire woman, right? And then he has a conversation with his wife, and then he's like, oh, she's like, oh, what did she do to you? And he's like, I'd be happy to show you. And then she's like, okay, after this she's like, oh, you know how to always get me back, don't you? After he's been fooling around, I'm gonna blame it on the vampire's powers, because the vampire lady also tries to seduce the wife in the relationship.
That's the only way I could justify it too, is that she just totally just hypnotized these people into falling in love with her. But because there's also the scene where the guy has sex with the vampire woman, on the floor in the middle of the living room, out in the open. And then his wife just catches him mid-act, and she stares at the woman as she's having sex with her husband.
Yeah. It's something else. What I found odd about this movie is after that bus station scene, there's a whole ending scene explaining things. And the movie tries to write itself off as that she wasn't a real vampire. And I thought that was a bit odd. It's like, oh, it was like a rare disease. And then the wife is like, but she died from crosses in sunlight. And the man's just like, oh, she just freaked herself out so bad because she thought she was a vampire. I was like, what?
I didn't understand. Well, I mean, so if you're going to introduce that plot line, I feel like you need to introduce it a lot earlier.
Yeah, this is like in the last 4 minutes, right?
It's in the very last scene, and he's explaining all of this, and it's just like a friend of hers, and then all of a sudden he's a vampire too.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the final shot is him sucking blood and a zoom in on her eyes looking frightened, which I always love that as a final shot in movies. It's cheesy, but I always enjoy that.
Right. I think there was little things like that too that I enjoyed, where there's a scene where the woman gets bit by a snake, and they're like, "Oh, we got to suck out the poison." So the vampire volunteers, and at first she does suck out the blood and spits out like a couple of mouthfuls, and then when she gets to the last one, she just swallows it, but you don't notice it unless you actually look at her. Yeah,
and she is really good. I feel like she stands out so much in this movie. Oh, Celeste Yarnall, really great. She's very Bela Lugosi-esque. She has that power, that entrancing look. She just awesome.
She pretty much carries this whole movie on her shoulders.
Oh yeah. I don't know. I think about the mirror scenes, and she's looking through the other side of the mirror, and just those shots of her where she's really doing nothing. She's able to just act with her eyes and really show her powers. It's
And she's a really beautiful woman. So, I mean, it's really easy to figure. It's really easy to believe that why these two people are just so enchanted by her beauty.
Yeah, exactly. This movie reminds me a lot. Have you ever seen The Black Cat? That's a Universal horror movie. That one's about a young couple that crashes their car, and they end up in the house of Boris Karloff, and they are kind of just stuck in this house, and they can't get out. Not vampire related or anything, but this movie reminded me a lot of that one. I just wanted to bring up that comparison. Nothing too crazy.
Were they seduced by Boris Karloff?
They were not seduced by Boris Karloff. It was the 30s.
Boris Karloff's striking beauty.
If I remember right, that has gay undertones in it, which is really interesting for the time. Which is interesting for this movie, because this movie also has not even gay undertones. It has bisexual people in this movie. Our lead is a bi queen. So
yeah,
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Opening up opportunities for everybody, this movie.
Exactly. And see, that's what's cool about this movie. I feel like it's different. And that's what I mean by appreciate it more is it's just a different breed of horror movie, and it's cool. I've never really seen anything like it. So other than The Black Cat, I guess. But, it's interesting.
Yeah, I applaud the effort, and even now, it's not something I've seen before, and even back then, I'm sure it was even stranger back then. Mm-hmm. So it's really easy to see why this one didn't have the success, but it does have a cult following right now. Stephanie Rothman has made 3 movies right now that are highly celebrated for their cult status, and it's on Blu-ray right now. The version we saw on Tubi is not a great quality. It's very, very rough. In fact, there's one scene where they're inside of a cavern. Not very long, thank God, but it is very hard to make out what's happening in that scene.
Oh, yeah. Tubi, love you. I'm glad they put out these movies, because it's really hard to watch them streaming otherwise, but this one was another rough one. But it wasn't so bad that I couldn't appreciate a lot of the imagery. And luckily, it was all desert stuff. So, at least it's bright to see.
I was going to say that just for a vampire movie and it having like a horror movie, this is a very bright movie. Most of this movie takes place in the daytime.
Yeah, daytime horror. Add it to the daytime horror list.
That's right.
But yeah, no, I'm glad this movie has gotten, it's time, it's reappraisal. I'm pretty sure that we have cleaned up releases of this on Blu-ray now, so deserved.
Yeah, I've seen clips of the HD version online, and it looks really crisp. So I suggest if you do want to see this movie, I would highly suggest seeking out the Blu-ray version.
Oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, it's hard to say. I feel like I put down this movie a little bit, but I recommend it. I think it's a movie. If this movie sounded interesting to you, definitely go out and see it.
Right, and I'm not gonna. I don't recommend it for the quality of it, but I do recommend it for, like I said, the ideas of it. It's something really different. And if you're willing to get out of your comfort zone a little bit with these horror movies, then I'd say check it out. There's not a whole lot of super arty movies that were back then. So, I mean, this is probably one you may have missed.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I think that is all. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I think that wraps it up for the Velvet Vampire. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, now that we're shutting the book on that one, Nathan, what are we going to be talking about next time?
Oh, we're going to be traveling to King Solomon's Mines from 1985. I'm really excited for this one. Yeah.
And that movie is streaming for free on Tubi, and I believe it's also on YouTube, free with ads.
Is it? Oh my God.
So please check this out. It's available. And if there are any thoughts and opinions you have on this podcast, or any recommendations you'd like for us to talk about, please email us at driveindoublefeaturepodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. But until next time.
See you later.
See ya.